Morning. I guess I should get the bad news out of the way first. New Day started with the script of the day being a meeting of nerds and lovies, and I'm probably coming from the nerd end of the market. I'm actually a physicist, and I learned recently to talk to real people, so put up with me, sorry about that. My part of the market is very much subject to disruption currently, and maybe just maybe converges on the world that Will described previously. This is all about health and social care. And I guess there's a subplot to this, which is if you think the European community is in crisis now, wait well 2020, when we're all 65, 75 and beyond, and the whole dynamic is going to have to change markedly. The point about this presentation is disruption. It's maybe there are some options, but there's a great deal of rewiring to do on those business models if you're going to make any sense. So what I was asked to do today was give you a bit of background to the propositions that are being delivered in this market, health and social care, and maybe position some of the challenges and what creates opportunities for innovation. So firstly, I was asked to give a bit of background on the company. I'm CTO, Chief Technology Officer for Tunstall Group. It's been around almost exactly the same number of years as the National Health Service. So I'm going to have to jump backwards and forwards by the look of it. And these are the topics I'm going to try and cover. A bit about our experiences, what works, what doesn't seem to work in these markets. Say a little bit about the evidence that needs to go with any of these new propositions to be acceptable in these markets. And then talk about the disruption and how that flows through to scale, to customers, the buying customer, and to the consumer. Apologies, I seem to not be able to make this one do its stuff. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you can.
Got it. CTO, you laugh. The thing about a company like Tunstall is what we do is we provide technological support. The theme is about allowing people to live, possibly even die, where they want to be. It's trying to address this problem of maybe institutional care isn't the answer in many situations. In fact, if you read the stats, in most situations it is not. People want to be in their own house as long as they can be there in their own life. The reason Tunstall got there is we provide systems in hospitals across the world. So if you go to a big Berlin hospital, many thousand beds, the systems there will do everything from helping you locate a nurse with an emergency alarm through to controlling your entertainment system at the bedside. At the other end of the spectrum, you'll find us providing systems in people's homes to keep them living independently as long as possible. And in fact, we've worked over quite a few years with the Technology Strategy Board on some research projects to this effect. Now, one obvious hole in that spectrum, when you look at it, was on the one hand, if you're providing hospitalised institutional care, but also at home, why can't you do some of those healthcare initiatives in the home environment or on the move? And that's exactly what sits behind this model of disruption. We're about 2,000 people shipping to around 32 countries. I think we've got subsidiaries in 15 of those countries today. The model largely started in the UK, which is why you see this sort of picture. And if you were to look at our revenues, you'd probably find 50% UK and North West Europe based, and it spreads out from there. Let's get into the actual solution before we hit the challenges that we face. So in our world, the sort of technology we're providing is largely about remote connectivity. This example is largely around a system of social care, so older people in home. Some of you may have come across the term telecare. There's currently around about 1.7 million people in the UK, about 4.5 million people worldwide using this sort of technology. The basic idea being that maybe, just maybe, you've got problems, there are unmet needs in your life, we can keep you living independently if we can just provide a bit of protective technology and maybe some clever software at the back end, ranging from simple alarms, this could be as simple as a smoke alarm, right the way through to monitoring your changing behaviour to help manage that lifestyle differently. So these sort of systems will typically spot that someone's out of bed, not returned to bed, may have fallen, the biggest cause of A&E admissions overnight, all the way through to various health monitors, fall sensors and so on. A similar system working in a slightly different way is all about health monitoring. So you'll hear terminology like telehealth here. Similar idea. So you might now be living at home with your chronic condition rather than being hospitalised for an extended period. In this case, maybe your blood pressure, your body weight's being monitored. You may be interacting with a hub device to answer certain health surveys. And again, collated through a secure back end to some software that in this case the clinician will look at. So the theory is you've got different models there. Maybe you can move people out of that institutional setting into your own home or your own lifestyle. And that is exactly what's happening today. But it poses some problems, because of course what you're doing is rewiring a business model as you do this. Evidence comes right to the top of the list every time. You're dealing with some quite critically ill people in many cases, and why would your GP refer to this sort of service unless he believed it, unless there's some evidence? And actually, until fairly recently, earlier this year, go to the Department of Health website for this sort of information. I'm not going to plot through that. But this idea of health monitoring for people with, for example, congestive heart failures, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, complex diabetes, people who normally would have been spending a lot of time in unplanned hospital admissions with long recovery periods, and now spending a lot more of their time at home using this sort of model. Still fairly early days for the UK. There's probably less than 10,000 people using these systems UK. Worldwide, the number's a lot bigger. You're probably near 100,000. And therein lies some of the clue around the possible challenge and the role of innovation in this. Probably the biggest surprise when this evidence came out back in March was mortality rates. So the whole idea of this was really about efficiency. This is about maybe you can spend your time recovering from illness at home. And of course, that means that community maintenance, doctors, physicians can connect with more people, and there's an obvious efficiency play there. But actually look at the top one. The biggest gain was mortality rates. People died less often just by being in the environment they wanted to be in. When you get to putting together the boxes and wires and the nerdy bit, and I'm not going to go through all these pictures, the reason these are here is to show that what you end up building, you're rewiring this model and you're building a new economy and new opportunities for systems. So it's okay saying, I will send me home with a blood pressure monitor, but actually how did this come about? Someone is going to have to refer you to that service in the first place. And if you're dealing with 10,000 people rather than 2, then there's a service to be managed. You know, how do you source that equipment? How do you get consent of that many people? How do you schedule training, installations? There's a whole service industry to be managed and created. And actually that's servicing a number of different disciplines. So the whole idea of this model originally, by the way, was that actually maybe people with high needs in the social care world, they're receiving an awful lot of home care. A big burden on the UK economy. We don't even like to describe ourselves as being a burden, but that's the way the politicians portray us. And of course what people are looking for is to move between these disciplines, but maybe rather than having that high needs home care delivery, maybe you can move towards a supported technology environment, get a little bit of a thinner proposition, cheaper proposition, and so on. But of course someone also needs to monitor. It's no point just sticking that technology in there and hoping it works. So there's always a layer of monitoring service behind this, and it goes on and on. Health records that sustain from that. People are now involved in the industry, analysing the outcomes data, assessing people's needs and referring them to different disciplines. You can see the structure emerging here of a slightly different economy. And the heart of this is that actually people don't stay still either. We don't want people to stay still. We want people to be re-abled, improve and move on. Sometimes people move downhill and have to go into more intensive services, but you don't want to provide a service for life, particularly with something like home care. So a model has emerged there, and it's now taking root in volume. But there is a but. Let's talk a little bit first about stakeholders. And maybe this is where some of those opportunities arise. If you try to map the boxes and wires to people commissioning and delivering these sort of services, there's a simple model up there that maybe starts with a GP identifying a need. And think of this a little bit like you needing a blood test. Well, that GP might refer you to a blood test, or they might refer you to some telehealth monitoring. Let's leave you at home. Remember I talked about service management. If you're referring many people, someone's got to deliver that service in scale. Ultimately, you might end up with a bit of technology, someone's going to be monitoring that, and actually a multi-layered model of monitoring seems to work quite well. And that's all around the fact that if you've got quite seriously ill people, I come from North Yorkshire, they have such a system up there, and for the sort of people they're monitoring who are on the brink of hospitalisation, this sort of equipment will typically alert 15-20% of the time. So every day, quite a lot of alerts. But actually a lot of that is around the things like Steve Sanders forgot to stand on the weighing scales today, or he's not taken his readings, or he's gone out for dinner with the family. Why wouldn't you? And actually what you end up with is this new service around filtering out the rubbish, the raw data, and get to something that's clinically meaningful. So actually what arrives on the community maintenance desktop is probably only about 4 or 5% of the activity. And even then they filter that before it gets back to the physician or the other care provider. So you can see that layered economy that builds there. And my point here is that when you work way around that new model, new stakeholders, it creates opportunities for new products, new technologies, new services. I'm not going to go through these, but for each of those stakeholders, what's happened, if you play this to Northern Ireland, for example, they're trying to get to around 10,000 managed patients, and Tunstall's delivering that programme over the next few years, next 3 or 4 years. There are pieces of software that scatter around this. There's intellectual property for people to create and contribute to this industry. It's a different industry. And I guess the big surprise for providers like Tunstall, who, let's be honest, come from the technology space, was find themselves needing to be creative in service industries. So the blobs in yellow there are activities that Tunstall, so this Tunstall Life Care is something that our company brands as a package that they deliver into, for example, primary care trusts, health authorities. We did not expect to be involved in the business of analysing risks of populations. We thought that would happen in the health economy departments of primary care trusts. We didn't do that. We didn't think we'd get involved in informed referrals and assessments of patients, but we have to do that because there's a vacuum there in many cases. There are opportunities for people to deliver new services or reporting data back. So it's changing the world that we're trying to deliver into. But I guess my real question for today is, are we being disruptive enough? And is there more of a convergence around this room? So if you look at what's happening in that whole system demonstrator, if you draw your Kaiser pyramid of illness down to wellness, we know there are something around 18 million registered long-term health conditions in the UK, and that high-intense usage pattern that we just described only applies to a pretty small part of that equation. When you start spreading to other conditions and trying to get lower down the curve, let's start managing asthma and hypertension and preventing the onset of some more serious conditions. You get challenged by uptake. So what's changing is a radically different perception of this is no longer an object in a factory. This is a person who's receiving services, and they are very personalised services. So the whole stigma that goes with health and social care monitoring is being challenged, and people are looking for different solutions. And actually, if you look at this initiative, I mean, have a look at their website. There's a government initiative all around 3 million lives. My view on this is that if you're going to get this remotely monitored health and social care solution of 3 million lives, it's got to be markedly different to where we are today. Because as that expands, each one of these people has a life story, a history, and something to offer, and they all demand different content and different types of engagement. So there's no one-size-fits-all anymore. And actually our industry is bumping up against that creative sector. And I want to finish with that example. Maybe this is posing something of a challenge, if I might be so bold, for the workshop this afternoon. So here's an example. I picked this example because this is actually a TSB part-funded project. It's called Vertex, Virtual Extra Care. For those who are familiar with the care industry, extra care can be pretty well regarded. It's trying to give you a place to live with lots of extra care rather than an institutional setting. And there are lots of qualities around that type of care that people value and wanted to see wider in the community. So the obvious question that was asked in this project was, well, can we not do that by using technology and tools, social inclusion tools, whether they be smartphones, tablets, whatever, to encourage that connectivity? I just want to give you a couple of anecdotes. This finished this project a couple of weeks ago, 3-year project. Lots and lots of focus groups, lots of end users, and they pinched a bunch of applications. I think we started with 150 sample applications, ended up with 9. And you'll have your own views on how useful some of these things are, things like secure messaging and content. But the anecdotes were far more interesting for me. One measurable anecdote was at a large site in the Midlands. One of our concerns was this technology could isolate, not include. So you might use this as a proxy rather than engaging real people on site. But actually what we found on this site was that people with this technology booked and arranged contact with events. It might be line dancing was the one that came up more often, but people getting out of their apartments and engaging with activities encouraged by this sort of digital content. But the best one for me was there was a particular chap on the site in Warsaw. This was a chap in his 80s. He lost his wife recently, and we had a little letter from his daughter. He basically his life had ended. He'd had enough. He'd lost his lifelong partner through a couple of world wars, and this was pretty much it. He grudgingly took part in the trial. He re-engaged with an old army chum in Australia. He was Skyping, exchanging content being an interesting theme here. The first thing he did was break this system. He was straight into the raw browser, and he quickly got past the walled garden that we had created, because he wanted to do other things. He was far more creative than we imagined he would be. And he quickly started sharing content, photos, images, music with a friend in Australia. We got a lovely letter back from the daughter about how he recovered some life. You know, we shouldn't underestimate the health benefits of people being engaged in that way and personally involved. But, and here's my challenge, it doesn't kind of work. So this was the half we talked about here. Here's this new framework, if you like, of statutory care model, with which you can introduce these remotely monitored and supported services, which is kind of fine. But actually, I don't really want to spend my time in that world. My time I want to spend on the right-hand side. I want to be using my iPhone, my tablet, I want to be going to parties, travelling, I want to be having fun, I want to have content, entertainment. And there's a bit of a dichotomy here, because really, when you think about it, you're cycling around this right-hand world for most of your life. In fact, the 90% is probably wrong. It's probably more like 97, 98%. Every now and again, fine, things are going to go wrong, and I want a soft landing into that statutory care world. And I want that to be seamless. I don't want to reinvent the conversation. I'll come back to what I mean by that in a moment. And I want to come back out again. I really want to come back out the other side. I don't want to stay in an institutional setting. I don't want to stay in the hospital any longer than I have to, because I know what comes out of that setting, unfortunately. But I want to finish on the challenge. So if you really want that to work, now have in your mind that tablet device, or let's keep it simple, a smartphone. So in the current world in which I operate, if I want to use that smartphone for that fabulous content that our old friend in Warsaw wanted, the one thing I can't do with that smartphone anymore is make phone calls. I can't browse, I can't do anything. I can't do that because it's locked down, because of interpretations of things like medical device directives. So I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge, that if this is going to work as a business model, if it really is going to scale to 3 million people, in other words, there'll be a pull economy rather than being pushed upon a smaller number who need it. I want to see if you guys can help me reconcile those two worlds, because if you're on the left-hand side, those are sort of words that you would normally hear. Very constricted, process control world, and it needs to be evidence. You need referrals from clinicians and physicians. And I want to be in that right-hand side world. So, for example, how would I use my smartphone, tablet, TV, whatever it's going to be, to track my diabetes? And then use that information cooperatively with my GP. And how will you transcend those barriers that come with that in terms of secure hosting of data, all of the regulatory initiatives that go with the health sector, with lockdown of certain devices? Crack that problem, you solve 2020, maybe even Greece will survive, I don't know. But there's a serious challenge there. So I think there's lots of opportunities, there's lots of disruption, and I think there's ultimately a convergence with the creative sectors. Thank you.
So, any questions, burning questions? Stop now.
Hi, it's not so much a question, it's just the fact that actually I come from the visual effects side of things a bit, and the whole kind of motion capture side, it was actually having all these issues for years. You know, that all of that technology started off as gait analysis. The people that made the equipment believed that it was sacrosanct, that that's what the patient did, that's what had to happen, and therefore but actually it's all now used for, you know, for doing creative characters, and actually all software allows you to actually manipulate the data and change things all around. So that kind of, you know, I think the reality is there are quite a lot of devices and things where actually there are these kind of, you know, two different slightly vying issues which actually come together. And I think it's more just the fact that there has to be more of a recognition of the fact that you say that it's not. I mean, I think the worst thing about that is that the health service likes to be a big bureaucracy which is managing outputs, and the kind of creative industries are actually something which are actually just managing what they want the thing to look like. And it seems to me that there are some examples where that's already come together, and perhaps can be drawn on a bit more.
A great example, and if you look at the biggest challenge in social care and telecare is this whole thing around fall detection. And there were various experiments with visual recognition and solutions to that. I'd love to explore that further, but what I'd love to think is when you find the right solution that really does work reliably, that you don't have to look at a 3-year randomised control trial on the end of it before it gets deployed to the market. I guess is the puzzle I'm posing here.
One more question.
Hi, my name's Brian Tabb from Pixelpin. I recently attended a MediLink seminar in Birmingham, and I was horrified to find, and I'm a startup, so Tunstall being around for 50 years is great. But I was horrified to find out that in order to take something up nationally within the NHS, it generally took a gestation period of 25 years. So my business it isn't in the long run. But having said that, the engagement with firms like yourself with disruptive technologies, you have all of that is important. The second point, in terms of addressing that, your own device, it's like taking your own device to work, and we're having that problem in industry now. But we keep getting hit by weird and wonderful EU directives like cookie law. I attend privacy seminars, government level and all sorts of stuff. People know what they want to give, yet we're being institutionalised not to be allowed to give that information. And I think there's a huge government a policy change that needs to take place. Have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I guess it's almost a kind of desperation in a sense. I wonder whether the governments ever will get their head around this, or the disruption actually put it in the hands of the consumer and reinforce that change.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah,